At Starbound, we tell stories the human way, not with artificial voices or AI garbage. And what's HFY without humanity? Subscribe to keep it that way. I'm Daniel Pierce, and I'm going to be your narrator. Now, let's get into today's story. Concourse Primus's floor was Jonas Gable's canvas, and his industrial buffer his brush. He worked in light, reflecting it from the polished floor. The composite floor stretched out, its polished surface reflecting the soft, simulated starlight from the vaulted ceiling of Fulcrum, a diplomatic station the size of a respectable moon. A good polish rendered the stone a mirror for the heavens, a foundation for the galaxy's most important conversations. A scuff mark was a discordant note in a symphony of silent diplomacy. The one near the Asia Tapestry's base was a personal affront. A dark, rubbery smear, likely from a hurried AIDS graph card, clung to the stone. It defied the buffer's standard pads, a stubborn stain on perfection. Jonas sighed, the station's ambient hum absorbing the sound. He knelt, his knees popping, and produced a small canister of his own proprietary solvent from a loop on his belt. A dab on a microfiber cloth, a moment for the chemicals to work, and then a firm, circular motion. The scuff yielded. This was the part of his work he relished, the simple, tangible act of setting something right. The Asia Tapestry loomed over him, a living event given sculptural form. Its filaments, a woven light, drifted in a slow, perpetual dance with a containment field. A dark, rubbery smear, likely from a hurried AIDS graph card, clung to the stone. It defied the buffer's standard pads, a stubborn stain on perfection. Jonas sighed, the station's ambient hum absorbing the sound. He knelt, his knees popping, and produced a small canister of his own proprietary solvent from a loop on his belt. A dab on a microfiber cloth. A moment for the chemicals to work, and then a firm circular motion. The scuff yielded. This was the part of his work he relished, the simple, tangible act of setting something right. The Asia Tapestry loomed over him, a living event given sculptural form. Its filaments of woven light drifted in a slow, perpetual dance within a containment field. Each filament represented a signatory to the axial chords, and their harmonious movement was a visual metaphor for galactic peace. The tapestry was also priceless, irreplaceable, and profoundly delicate. A stray energy discharge could unravel it in seconds, which was why the screech of tortured metal and the panicked chirps of a service drone shattered the concourse's tranquility. Jonas looked up from his work, his brow tightening. A Goshawk-class sparring drone, a machine of interlocking limbs designed for training elite soldiers, rocketed down the concourse. Its optical sensors, normally a calm blue, pulsed with a furious, erratic red. It broke containment. With its lethal engagement protocols active, the machine skittered, its metallic claws gouging deep, ugly lines into a section of floor he just finished. A muscle near Jonah's eye pulsed. Then came the synchronized thunder of heavy footsteps. A squad of 12 Sidonian wardens, encased in resplendent armor that magnified their bulk, moved to intercept. Plates of polished chrome and gold inlay augmented their exoskeletons, which featured 2 additional articulated manipulator arms folded against the chest plate. The armor caught the station's light in blinding jewel-toned flashes. They moved in a tight wedge, a tactic for breaching fortified positions. Sidonian training manuals dictated the maneuver for open battlefields, rendering it unsuited for the cluttered concourse. The lead warden, a towering specimen of a Sidonian, brandished a ceremonial energy spike. His helmet, a marvel of defensive engineering designed to deflect energy blast, also gave him the peripheral vision of a tunnel. Jonas tracked the collision vectors, the drone, the wardens, the priceless tapestry. He mapped their intersection with the grim certainty of a past life he worked to forget. The drone, its logic circuits fried, made a direct course for the Asia Tapestry's shimmering light. The warden squad, focused entirely on their target, held a direct intercept course. Their path would take them right over his freshly cleaned patch of floor. Their heavy, magnetized boots would ruin everything. He acted to defend his work, a motive eclipsing all concern for the priceless artwork or scattering diplomats. His movements were spare, almost lazy, as Jonas stood. He held the thick, industrial-grade power cord of his buffer in both hands. He was in his mid-40s, with the unassuming build of a man whose most strenuous activity involved wrestling bags into trash receptacles. He understood leverage, momentum, and predictability. As the drone charged past, he yanked the power cord taut about ankle height. The speeding drone's sensors scanned too high. The cable snagged its lower limbs. It flipped forward, a chaotic whirl of flailing appendages and sparking circuits, and landed in a heap directly in the lead warden's path. The Sidonian, locked into his charge and blind to the sudden low-profile obstacle, plowed on, his heavy armored boots planted squarely on the drone's chassis. His ankle twisted, and he went down like a statue toppled from its pedestal. He crashed, his energy spike spinning from his grip, and slammed into the backs of two wardens directly behind him. His fall triggered a chain reaction. The Sidonian wedge, so impressive on an open parade ground, became a disastrous liability in the cluttered concourse. It was a domino rally of chrome and indignation. Wardens tripped over the drone, over the fallen commander, over each other. They became a tangle of limbs and armored manipulators. The rigid discipline of their unit cohesion worked against them, each soldier's attempt to maintain spacing only adding to the collective stumble. For 3 seconds, the concourse filled with the scrape of armor on stone and the grunts of flailing Sidonians. And in that chaos, Jonas moved. He stepped over the tangled power cord like it was a puddle. The lead warden's pike spun through the air, and Jonas caught it by the haft, its weight familiar in his hand. As the second warden, flailing for balance, swung his own pike wide, Jonas used the captured pike to hook the weapon, twist it, and lift it clean from the man's grasp with a flick of his wrist. The man, his balance already compromised, spun around and sat down hard, cocking his head behind his visor in stunned confusion. A third warden was trying to untangle his leg from a comrade's arm. Jonas used the downed man's pauldron as a stepping stone, reached over and unclipped the magnetic lock on the third warden's weapon harness. The energy rifle clattered to the floor. Jonas maintained his stride. He weaved through the pileup, a gentle push here, a redirected arm there. He used their own momentum, their own entanglement, their own rigid bulk against them. He unlatched another rifle, twisted a pike from a four-fingered grip, and palmed a sidearm from a thigh holster as the owner was trying to push himself up. Each weapon he removed was another scuff mark erased, a deliberate act of setting things right. By the time the drone circuits finished sparking, the encounter was over. The concourse fell silent, save the disabled drone's crackle and the groans of 12 of the galaxy's most elite soldiers trying to untangle themselves. Diplomats and aides stared, mouths open. Jonas Gable, custodial technician 3rd class, stood in the center of the mess, a small collection of Sidonian military hardware at his feet. He still held the first energy pike, resting its butt on the floor like a mop handle. He looked at the chaos, at the priceless untouched sculpture, and then down at the floor. Fresh black scuff marks left by the Sidonian boots now marred the area he just cleaned. He sighed, long and weary with profound disappointment. This fresh indignity soured his entire shift. Prefect Saline's office was a monument to order. Plain gray walls enclosed the space, and the desk a single slab of polished volcanic glass. A single personal console rested on its surface, perfectly aligned with the desk edges. Even the air felt organized, scrubbed of any stray particles of dust or scent. From her seat in a chair more throne than office furniture, Saline radiated a silent stillness more intimidating than any shout. Her exoskeleton, a deep amethyst today, was so polished it reflected the room in distorted miniature. She rested her primary hands on the arms of her chair, her armor's two smaller secondary manipulator arms folded across her chest. She focused her large mirrored eyes, which reflected the room in disconcerting detail with flat, depthless stillness. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and two of her wardens, their armor now bearing several new undignified scratches, escorted the human in. They handled him with a ginger stiffness, like he might disassemble them with a paperclip and a harsh word. Jonas Gable shuffled in, looking less like a tactical genius and more like a man whose sandwich was getting cold, which it was. He glanced around the Spartan office, his expression one of mild disinterest. "Prefect Saline," a warden announced, then retreated, the door sealing Saline and the human in a tomb of awkward silence. Saline remained silent. She let the silence stretch, a common Sidonian interrogation tactic designed to unnerve an opponent. Jonas used the quiet to surreptitiously check a spot on his uniform sleeve. He rubbed at it with his thumb, then seemed satisfied. Saline spoke, her voice a low, resonant contralto, clipping each word. You, all Jonas Gable. Custodial technician 3rd class. Employment contract cycle. 4 Terran standard years, with a clean service record. That's me, Jonas said, his tone suggesting she had just read his grocery list. Look, if this is about the unauthorized use of the buffer's power supply, I can assure you it was a temporary measure to prevent damage to the station property. The paperwork is probably already on your console. He squinted at the desk. Or it will be once I file it. Saline flickered her mirrored eyes. Paperwork? She repeated, the word sounding like a foreign insult. You interfered with a grade 4 security operation involving an unstable prototype. You assaulted, disarmed, and publicly humiliated 12 wardens of the Sidonian Mandate. Assaulted is a strong word, Jonas countered. More like reoriented. They tangled themselves. I helped untangle them, mostly. And they dropped their things. I just picked them up. Clumsy armor. You should look into something with better articulation around the joints. A wider field of view for the helmet might help too. He paused. Also, they scuffed my floor. Saline's primary hands clenched into fist. He stood before the commander of Fulcrum's entire security force and critiqued their equipment while complaining about a smudge. We train all Wardens from hatching in numerous forms of Sidonian combat, she said, her voice low, each word a sharpened edge. They calculate firing solutions in their minds while executing zero-gravity maneuvers. They embody centuries of Sidonian discipline and honor. They're also a textbook example of what happens when a rigid tactical doctrine meets an unpredictable obstacle, Jonas said, shrugging. They zigged, the drone zagged, and they all ended up in a heap. It happens. Now, if I could just get a chit to requisition a new buffer pad, that drone did a number on the bristles. Before Saline could respond, a soft chime filled the office. A red alert symbol flashed on her personal console, a pulsing icon signifying a Priority 1 crisis. She forgot the janitor and his floor. This was the alert for a diplomatic incident. She tapped the console, her movement sharp and direct. A file bloomed across the screen. Security reports, frantic communiques, a grainy image from a residential corridor. Prefect. The voice of her second-in-command crackled from the console speaker. We have confirmed abduction. Amarath Ward, residential wing. The victim is Karis, daughter of Ambassador Hespar from the Per Se Trade Compact. Saline's insides went cold. Ambassador Hespar was famously mercurial, and his trade compact was negotiating a treaty that would stabilize 3 galactic quadrants. His daughter was, in essence, a supremely valuable political asset on the entire station. Security response? She demanded. Negative, Prefect. The abductors were clean. They used credentials forged with a stolen diplomatic encryption key to access the wing. The perpetrators bypassed all alarms. The ambassador's report was the first alert. They had at least a 20-minute head start. Saline processed tactical scenarios, deployment patterns, station lockdowns. This was a sophisticated silent abduction. She was about to issue a dozen orders when she settled her gaze upon the unassuming human still standing in her office. He was looking at her console, head tilted, his eyes tracking the data streams. Well, Jonas said, breaking the silence. Looks like you've got a busy day. He gestured toward the door. So, about that buffer pad. Saline stared at him as a terrible, brilliant, and humiliating idea formed. The Fulcrum Central Command Nexus was the station's beating heart, a vast chamber where holographic displays shimmered, and dozens of technicians from a multitude of species monitored the flow of galactic traffic, diplomacy, and life support. Saline stood at the main tactical table, where targeting solutions and station telemetry flooded the holographic field. Kira Mesa, report, she commanded. Kira Mesa, a younger Sidonian whose exoskeleton was a burnished bronze, manipulated the holographic battlespace. Her movements were faster, less rigid than her prefects. We've identified the abductor's ship, an old modified freighter, the Vagrant. It's running dark, but we have its last known trajectory. They're heading for the outer rim, likely the Shambles. A star chart materialized over the table, a dotted line showing the freighter's escape vector. The abductors? Saline asked.
Scans of their credentials cross-referenced with intel databases give us a probable match, Kuramesa said, zooming in on several files projected in the air. They showed images of several aliens, all with extensive records. The Marrow Dogs, a smuggling ring known for high-risk acquisitions, a disorganized, opportunistic, and notoriously violent crew. Sailing studied their file. Their methods, varying from brute force to electronic stealth, showed no apparent pattern. The tactics are chaos. Sidonian doctrine is order, she murmured, more to herself than to her subordinate. How do you predict chaos? Prefect, a soft, synthesized voice announced from her personal comm unit. The station administrator, a non-corporeal intelligence inhabiting Fulcrum's core network, spoke from her personal comm unit. A word, if I may. Administrator? Saline acknowledged, her posture stiffening. I have reviewed the incident in Corncors Primus, the voice said, its tone flatly factual, as well as the preliminary report on the abduction of the ambassador's daughter. I note the perpetrators relied on misdirection and a subversion of standard security protocols. We are already adapting our response, Administrator, Saline said, her jaw tight. Indeed, the voice hummed. I also note how decisively custodial technician Gable responded to the drone. His approach instantly exploited a vulnerability in a predictable system, a skill that might prove useful. The administrator's words landed with the weight of an execution order. The ambassador is a key figure, the administrator continued. A public failure would be catastrophic. The warden's renown stems from their systematic excellence. However, this situation may call for a more creative approach. I strongly suggest, Prefect, that you avail yourself of every available asset, including your new unconventional tactics consultant. The connection closed. Saline stood frozen for a moment as her command staff watched her. She rebelled against the idea, a violation of her honor, her training, her entire worldview. Consulting a janitor, a sloppy, sarcastic primate who had accidentally bested her finest soldiers? The administrator's logic was sound. The Marrow Dogs were unpredictable. Her methods were failing. The human had looked at her console, his expression focused, analytical. A pattern emerged for him from what she perceived as only chaos. Kuramesa, Saline said, her voice tight. Bring me the human. Her career, it seemed, now depended on a man whose primary concern was the structural integrity of a mob. Jonas was on his hands and knees, meticulously applying a sealant to the hairline cracks left by the sparring drone's claws, when two wardens found him. They stood over him, their shadows falling across his work. The Prefect wants to see you, one of them said. His stiff posture and clipped tone conveyed his resentment. This was a warden from the pile-up. Tell her I'm busy, Jonas said as he fixed his gaze on the sealant. This compound needs to set at least 20 minutes before I can buff it. It's a delicate process. It's an order. Jonas sighed and sat back on his heels, wiping his hands on a rag. Look, I'm sorry about your collective faceplant earlier, but I've got a job to do. A job that your malfunctioning hardware and subsequent synchronized tumble made significantly harder. They escorted him once again to Saline's office. This time, the Prefect was standing, pacing the length of her volcanic glass desk. Gable, she began, dispensing with any formality. I require your assistance. My assistance? Jonas asked, feigning surprise. Did someone spill something in a hard-to-reach area? Because for that, you'll need to file a work order with Custodial Command. Form 12C, I believe. My concern is with the diplomat's daughter, Saline snapped. Someone has abducted her. We are mounting a recovery mission. My superiors have advised me to include you. Jonas stared at her. For a moment, his lazy posture straightened. The sarcasm fled his expression, replaced by weary, calculating stillness. Her posture broadcast desperation, her jaw rigid with loathing for the situation. He recognized that look. He had seen it on the faces of commanding officers who were out of their depth. No, he said. Saline stopped pacing. What? No, thank you. I'm a janitor. My skills are in sanitation, not security. He turned to leave. I can offer you a bonus, she said. A substantial one. Jonas paused at the door, his back to her. I have no need of it. A commendation, a promotion. You could head the entire custodial division."
Too much paperwork," he replied, reaching for the door panel. Saling's patience broke.
"Fine," she growled. "Let us forego the pretense of negotiation. You interfered with a security operation. You performed unauthorized handling of military-grade assets. These are serious charges, technician, the penalty for which, at minimum, is immediate termination of your employment contract and summary eviction from the fulcrum."
Jonas froze, his hand over the panel. He turned back to face her, his movements measured. His quiet life, constructed from anonymity and floor wax, was under threat. He had to play along. He sized her up. Raw desperation warred with her professional pride. Her team's predictable actions would endanger the girl. A deep, familiar weariness washed over him. "All right," he said, holding up a hand. The word felt dry in his mouth. "I'll help. On my terms." Saling narrowed her eyes.
"Specify."
1. My way. I see a problem. I suggest a solution. You listen. You may refuse, but only with a better reason than adherence to doctrine." She hesitated, her entire being rebelling against the notion of ceding tactical command to a civilian. But she was desperate. "Acceptable." 2. Address me as a consultant. I will act as a consultant, separate from your command structure.
"Decorum noted," she said dryly. "Agreed."
And 3. Jonas said as he locked his eyes with hers, a flicker of the man he used to be surfacing for a moment. "If I say duck, you hit the deck. Immediately. All of you." Saling stared at him, baffled by the strange, specific command. For a moment, something hard and unforgiving surfaced in his eyes. The memory of a past failure.
"Agreed,"
she conceded. "Good," Jonas said, his demeanor shifting back to that of a put-on employee. "Now, where are we going? I need to know if I should pack a heavy-duty degreaser." The patrol ship, the Vigil, was a Sidonian vessel through and through. Its corridors were immaculate, its lighting cool and efficient, and the air hummed with the sound of perfectly calibrated machinery. The air held the scent of active circuitry and the faint mineral tang of polished armor. Jonas shuffled along the immaculate corridors, a smudge in a sterile world. He followed Celine and Kuramesa onto the bridge, where a handful of wardens stood at their post. Every warden on the bridge stiffened as he entered, their gazes hostile. "The floor plates could use a polish," Jonas muttered, running his shoe over the matte gray surface. Celine ignored him, gesturing to the main holographic display.
"Kuramesa, brief him."
Kuramesa brought up the file on the Marrow Dogs. Mug shots and grainy security footage filled the air.
"We've established the target vessel in the Vagrant, en route to the Shambles. The dogs are multi-species smuggling crew led by a Lothian named Falk. His file indicates a preference for smash-and-grab operations."
She highlighted a series of past crimes, a bank robbery on Ashgar where they blew the main vault door while simultaneously setting off diversionary explosives on the city's other side, an art heist where they triggered a fire alarm in one museum wing to draw security away from the wing they were actually targeting, a corporate data theft where they initiated a massive denial-of-service attack on the company's public servers, providing cover for a single hacker to slit through a maintenance port.
"The history is one of chaos,"
Saling concluded, her primary arms crossed.
"The targets and methods appear random, a display of tactical chaos."
Jonas leaned against the console, looking bored. Now he pushed himself off it and walked toward the display. "You're looking at it wrong," he said. Saling's jawplates tightened.
"Enlighten us, technician."
"You're focusing on the noise," Jonas said, pointing a finger at the bank robbery hologram. "They blew the vault. Loud, obvious. Everyone looks at the big boom, but the manifest from that day shows someone also opened a small secure deposit box using a quiet bypass. The box contained bearer bonds worth 10 times what was in the main vault." He swiped his hand, bringing up the museum heist. "Fire alarm in the East Wing. Big response. Flashing lights, lots of shouting. Everyone runs that way. But the real target was a small historical text from the West Wing archives. They unlocked the case. They just walked out the front door while everyone was looking at the fake fire." He kept going, crime after crime, pointing out the same pattern.
a loud, dramatic, and often violent diversion designed to mask a quiet, subtle, and far more valuable objective. They orchestrate chaos, Jonas finished, turning to face the stunned Sidonians. They are misdirection artists more than smugglers. They always hide the real objective behind the spectacle. Kura Mesa stared at the display, rapidly recontextualizing the data.
He's right,
she whispered, her voice tight with revelation.
The meta-strategy is the pattern.
Celine remained silent. She stared at the human janitor, who just dissected a complex criminal operation with the ease of a man identifying a type of stain. She reevaluated him, the contempt in her thoughts momentarily silenced by a grudging, unsettling respect. Celine respected Jonas's analysis, but she needed to understand the man himself. His economy of motion during the concourse incident suggested training, a deliberate skill beyond mere luck. She found him in the Vigil's training room, examining the control panel for the holographic combat simulators. I assume you have some form of combat training, Gable, she said, her voice echoing the large, empty chamber. Well, I know which end of a mop gets dirty, he replied, his back to her. That's about it. I doubt that, Celine said, stepping onto the glowing combat mat. Indulge me, weapons aside, hand to hand. Jonas turned, sighing. Look, Prefect, my purpose here is consultation, not games. Consider this part of your job, she insisted. I need to gauge the capabilities of my consultant. She settled into a classic Sidonian starting stance. Lower body braced as she held her arms high for striking, the armor's limbs held low for defense, posture perfected by centuries of martial training. Jonas just stood there, his posture slumped, looking like a man waiting for a transport. Fine, but if I pull a muscle, it comes out of your operational budget. Celine moved, a blur of amethyst. Her lead arm jabbed forward with startling speed, a strike designed to test his defense. He took a half step to the side and leaned his head. The strike passed harmlessly by his ear. Her forward momentum, committed and absolute, carried her past him. As she moved, he placed his foot where she would land. Celine, for all her training, stumbled over a janitor's orthopedic shoe. Her instincts converted the stumble into a graceful spin, intending to lash out with a low sweep of the leg, but Jonas already moved. He used her own spin to continue her rotation, placing a gentle hand on her back to guide her. She spun around a full 360 degrees, ending up exactly where she started, only now slightly off balance and facing the wrong way. A light tap on the back of her helmeted head. You're good, Jonas said, his voice calm and conversational. He stood behind her, having barely moved. Your technique is flawless, textbook. The problem is, your opponents rarely read the textbook. Celine stood rigid as she clenched her hands into fist. He had managed her, redirecting her own force with gentle guidance. Your style assumes your opponent will meet force with force, he continued, walking around to face her. You prepare for blocks, parries, counterattacks. You anticipate an adversary meeting power with power. Simple evasion leaves you open. He tapped his temple. You fight the body. I pay attention to the feet. A person's feet determine their path. He gestured at her magnificent armor. This armor is a hindrance. It's heavy, it's noisy. It tells your opponent exactly what you're going to do before you do it. In a duel of honor in some grand hall, it's impressive. In a dirty alley fight, it's a liability. He stated facts, his tone level. Celine stood motionless on the mat, the light tap on her head feeling heavier than any blow she had ever received. The vagrant docked at the shambles under a veil of anonymity. The bazaar was a swarm. Hundreds of ships, from derelict hulks to sleek private yachts, lashed together with magnetic clamps and jury-rigged umbilicals, forming a sprawling, chaotic asteroid colony. No central authority existed. Enforcement belonged to the biggest gun. The moment the Vigil's airlock opened, a wall of sensory information hit the team. The air was thick with the smells of sizzling alien meats, acrid smoke from faulty power couplings, and the scent of unrecycled sweat. Noise assaulted them from all sides. Vendors shouting in a dozen languages, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer on strange alloys, the thumping bass of music from a nearby cantina. Visually, the scene was a chaotic blur of flickering neon, belching steam pipes, and shifting, jostling crowds. Saline and her squad, clad in their immaculate armor, stepped onto the docking platform and became the instant center of attention. All activity within 50 meters ceased. The market's chaotic symphony faltered as hundreds of eyes turned to stare at the shining, disciplined soldiers. They stood out like polished chrome in a junkyard. The wardens shifted. Their training had prepared them for hostile fire, zero-G combat, and planetary assaults. Their training omitted how to handle the stares of a throng of greasy, multi-limbed mechanics and shifty-eyed traders. Their disciplined wedge, usually intimidating, felt like a parade that had taken a wrong turn.
So much for a low-profile insertion,
Kuramason muttered into their private comm channel, her posture tensed. Maintain discipline, Saline ordered, though the sheer volume of sensation overwhelmed her. The place's sheer disorder was an affront to the Sidonian sensibilities. Jonas, however, stepped out after them and took a deep breath. Smells like home, he said. He might have been referring to a place or just a general state of disrepair. He walked over to a nearby food stall run by a gelatinous tentacled being and pointed. What's that? Looks chewy. The Sidonians watched in disbelief as their supposed consultant began haggling over a stick of unidentifiable grilled matter. He blended in. He was just another working stiff in a universe full of them. For the first time, Saline understood the tactical advantage of being utterly and completely unremarkable. Kiramesa's intelligence had identified a local information broker known as Patch, a cyborg who operated out of a cluttered electronics repair shop in the market's heart. Finding him was the easy part. Getting him to talk was another matter. Patch was a wiry, ancient-looking creature, his organic parts withered and frail, his cybernetics a patchwork of mismatched scavenged tech. One optical sensor was a dull red photoreceptor, the other a high-magnification lens that whirred as it focused. He sat behind a counter piled high with tangled wires and disassembled gadgets, a soldering iron in one of his 3 mechanical hands. Saline and 2 of her wardens entered the shop, their bulk making the small space feel even more cramped. They had to duck to avoid wires hanging from the ceiling. Patch, Saline announced, her voice resonating with authority. I am Prefect Saline of the Sidonian Wardens. We require information regarding the smuggling crew known as the Morrow Dogs. Patch looked up, his mismatched optics taking in their polished armor. A series of clicks and whirs emanated from his throat, which Jonas, standing by the door, eventually identified as laughter.
Sidonian Wardens,
Patch rasped, his voice a synthesized buzz.
You're a long way from that shiny station, Prefect. Lost?
We are conducting an official investigation, Saline said, ignoring the jibe. We expect your cooperation. Tell us where we can find their leader, Falk.
Expected,
Patch repeated, savoring the word.
I love that. You come into my place of business dressed for a coronation and you expect things. What do I get for this expected cooperation? A shiny medal? A pat on the head?
He cackled again.
Get out. The Warden's authority is worth less than scrap metal here.
One of Saline's wardens took a menacing step forward, his hand resting on his sidearm. Patch's mechanical arm swiveled, the tip of his soldering iron glowing cherry red, less than an inch from the warden's visor.
Easy there, Chrome Dome,
the cyborg buzzed.
You'll melt your faceplate and then your prefect will have to fill out, what was it? Paperwork.
Mockery was an attack vector for which Saline had no protocol. Before Saline could escalate the situation, Jonas stepped past her. He walked up to the counter holding a small familiar canister from his custodial belt. Patch's optical lens whirred as it focused on the human.
And who are you, the shiny one's valet?
Jonas ignored the question. He pointed to Patch's primary manipulator, a complex mechanical hand caked in decades of flux, grime, and lubricant. That joint actuator is sticking, yes? Jonas observed. Probably gets stiff in the cold. Patch's red photoreceptor blinked.
What's it to you?
Instead of answering, Jonas sprayed a small amount of the canister's contents onto a clean rag from his pocket. He reached across the counter, and before Patch or the wardens could react, he began rubbing the solvent onto the grimy joint of the cyborg's hand. There was a soft fizzing sound. The thick black grime dissolved, dripping away to reveal the shining chrome vanadium alloy beneath. The metal shone like new. Jonas took Patch's hand and flexed the fingers. They moved smoothly, silently, for what was probably the first time in years. Patch stared at his own hand. He opened and closed it, the movement fluid and perfect. He looked at the clean, shining metal, then at the canister in Jonas's hand, then back at his own hand. A strange, rasping sound came from his vocalizer, a sigh of satisfaction. Industrial-grade degreaser and particulate solvent, Jonas murmured. My own mix. Breaks down carbonized oils and synthetic polymers while preserving the underlying alloy, and it's safe for your servos. He placed the full canister on the counter. Patch stared at it, his red photoreceptor glowing brightly. He looked up at Jonas, his mismatched eyes wide. The mocking tone in his voice vanished. The marrow dogs, Jonas said, his voice low. Where are they? Patch snatched the canister from the counter. Old scrapyard, Tenebra Kilo Grid, near the defunct smelting pit. He raps instantly. They've holed up in the old foreman's office, but move fast. His red photoreceptor fixed on saline. Grin runs the market. A squad of shiny wardens will draw his eye, and he hates competition. He looked at Jonas. You want a map? Jonas shook his head. I've got one. He turned and walked out of the shop, leaving the prefect and 2 wardens standing in his wake. They found a secure, relatively clean room in the back of a cargo transfer station to use as a temporary command post. Kura Mesa projected a holographic schematic of the Tenebra Kilo Grid scrapyard onto a grimy wall. The foreman's office was a reinforced structure in the center of a maze of junk heaps and rusted machinery. It's a fortress, Saline observed, assessing the situation. One primary entrance, but elevated firing positions all around. They'll have the door covered. A frontal assault would be a massacre. She traced lines on the hologram with her finger. We'll need a multi-pronged approach. Team Alpha will create a diversion here at the primary power conduit. Team Bravo will use the distraction to scale the scantry and secure a sniper overwatch position. Team Charlie, led by me, will breach from this maintenance tunnel on the far side. The plan was complex and synchronized, requiring exact timing, a Sidonian specialty. Jonas, who had been examining a leaky pipe in the corner of the room, shook his head. You have a criticism, technician? Ceiling asked, her tone sharp. Just a question, Jonas said. What do you think they're expecting? An assault, Ceiling said. They have a high-value hostage. They know we're coming. Exactly, Jonas said. They're expecting soldiers. They're expecting tactics. They have a plan for all of that. He walked over to the hologram and pointed at the market map, specifically at a greasy-looking food stall they had passed earlier called Fungo's Gut Bombs. They've been in there for hours, Jonas said. They're probably getting hungry. He looked at Saline. They're expecting soldiers. A food delivery will walk right past their defenses. The room fell silent. The other Sidonian warden stared at Jonas as if he had just suggested they attack the hideout with sharpened spoons. You must be joking, Saline said, her voice low. They're smugglers, opportunistic and lazy, Jonas countered. Right now, their paranoia anticipates your soldiers hiding in the shadows. It's blind to the arrival of the kid from the local noodle joint. We walk up to the front door and knock. It is the most absurd, undignified, and tactically unsound plan I have ever heard, Saline stated. Which is exactly why it will work, Jonas said with a thin smile. Remember the textbook? They've read it. They've got the chapter on the multi-pronged assaults memorized. But I guarantee that book omits any mention of dinner delivery. The Sidonian wardens had replaced their resplendent ceremonial armor with the grimy, stained coveralls of local couriers. The fit was awkward over their exoskeletons, and the smell of recycled fabric and old food stains was clearly an offense to their sensibilities. While Celine reluctantly relayed the new, deeply embarrassing plan to her teams, Kura Mesa approached Jonas. She was transferring several steaming, foul-smelling containers of what fungo gut bombs passed off as food into a thermal delivery bag.
Prefect Saline is struggling to accept this course of action,
Kura Mesa said, her voice quiet. She's a soldier, Jonas said, fixing his gaze on his work. Soldiers think in terms of force. Sometimes the answer is subtlety over strength.
You are more than a janitor,
Kura Mesa asked. Jonas stopped what he was doing. He stared down at the food containers for a long moment, the steam rising to fog his face. For a second, his sarcastic expression faded, revealing the weary man beneath. I had a job once, he said, his voice low and heavy with memory. A long time ago. I was part of a team, a good team. He picked up a container, his knuckles white. We had a mission, an intel recovery on a hostile moon. We had a solid plan, but the situation on the ground changed, new variables. I saw a different way, a quieter way in. My CO, he was like your prefect. By the book. He believed in the doctrine. Jonas fell silent. The sounds of the market outside seemed to fade away. Following the book led my entire squad into an ambush. He finished, his voice flat. The intel said there were 4 guards. There were 40. The book said breach and clear. We breached and were overwhelmed. He looked at Kuramesa, his eyes dark with a past that always caught up to him. I was the sole survivor. I learned something that day. The book keeps you safe right up until the moment it gets you killed. After that, I decided I'd rather push a mob. The floor is predictable. Its rules are constant. She saw his sarcastic detachment as a shield, his obsession with cleanliness, a way to impose order on a chaotic universe. His refusal to follow protocol was born from survival.
Delivery team is in position.
Kuramesa whispered into her comm, her voice tight. From their overwatch position, she and Celine had a clear view of the scrapyard's main gate. The rest of the squad hid in the surrounding junk piles, ready to storm the compound at Celine's command.
On your signal, Prefect.
A warden's voice crackled in her ear. Celine held her silence. She fixed her mirrored eyes on the 2 figures walking nonchalantly toward the heavily fortified door. Jonas and another warden, a burly Sidonian named Broll, whose rigid posture betrayed his unhappiness in his courier disguise, carried a stack of steaming food boxes. Jonas walked with the slightly stooped shuffle of a man who was tired and underpaid. He ignored the hidden cameras and scanned no rooftops. He looked like he was thinking about putting his feet up at the end of a long shift. They walked right up to the front door. Celine's hand hovered over the button that would send her teams charging in. Then Jonas knocked. A simple, polite knock, knock, knock on the reinforced steel door. Celine listened over the open comm channel, unable to process what she was hearing. There was a small metallic scraping sound, and a small viewing slit in the door slid open.
Who's it?
A gruff voice demanded from inside. Fungo's gut bombs, Jonas said in a bored tone. Got an order for Falk, 3 slime noodle supremes, and a side of fried creeper eggs. It's 42 credits. There was a long pause. Celine could hear muffled arguing from inside the hideout.
We didn't order any food,
the voice said, suspicious. Look, buddy, is this the old foreman's office? Jonas asked, his voice now laced with annoyance. The order is for here, your choice, but the charge is final. He turned as if to leave. Come on, bro, let's go. I'm not waiting around all day.
Wait.
The voice came from inside, shouted, a note of panic in it.
Hold on.
More muffled arguing. Celine could just make out words like idiot and my money. Finally, several heavy bolts were thrown. The heavy steel door scraped open a few feet. A hulking 4-armed alien peered out.
Fine, give it here,
he grumbled, reaching for the food. 42 credits first, Jonas said flatly. As the alien fumbled for a credit chip, Jonas and Broll stepped smoothly through the doorway into the hideout. Celine stared, her jaw plates agape as the door scraped shut behind them. Her tactical consultant had just breached a fortified enemy position by arguing over the price of noodles. The inside of the foreman's office surprised Jonas. A young, well-dressed human female was pacing the floor, arguing heatedly with a wiry Lothian who could only be Falk, the leader of the Marrow Dogs.
I am not getting on that ship,
she declared, pointing an accusatory finger.
It smells like fermented spore pods, and I saw something leaking from the engine cowling.
It's a cargo hauler, Your Highness, not a luxury liner,
Falk shot back, throwing his hands up in exasperation.
It's the best I could do on the short notice.
Now, are you coming? The deal was, I get you to the neutral zone. You pay me. We part ways. The half-dozen other smugglers in the room looked on, their expressions a mix of boredom and irritation. This was clearly an argument that had been going on for some time. Jonas and Broll stood in the entryway, holding the now cooling food delivery. The entire room turned to stare at them.
Oh,
said the hulking alien at the door, who had just found his credit chip.
Dinner's here.
Jonas took the scene in a single sweeping glance. The expensive clothes on the girl, her defiant posture, the smugglers who looked more like exasperated babysitters than hardened criminals. He pieced the situation together with a depressing familiarity. "Let me guess," Jonas said, setting the food down on a crate. "Arranged marriage to some political rival's son to seal a treaty you want no part of." He looked at the girl, who stopped her pacing and stared at him. "So you hired these guys to fake your own kidnapping to escape it." Karis, daughter of the ambassador, blinked in surprise.
How did you?
"It's got all the hallmarks of a common political headache," Jonas said with a weary sigh. He turned to Falk. "And you lot took the job because it seemed like easy money, but you severely underestimated the high-maintenance nature of a rich, rebellious teenager." Falk, the notorious smuggler, deflated. "She complained about the quality of the forged travel documents." "Complained? Do you know how hard it is to get a decent forger these days?" Broll, the Sidonian warden, stood frozen, his hand hovering near the sidearm hidden under his courier jacket. "Okay, new plan," Jonas said, rubbing the space between his eyes. He keyed his internal comm, his voice a low whisper only Kira Mesa could hear. "Kira Mesa, tell the prefect to hold position. Repeat, hold position. Hostage situation is complicated. No breach. I'll explain later." To the room, he said, "All right, here's what we're going to do. Falk, you and your crew are going to surrender to the nice, heavily armed soldiers waiting outside." The smugglers tensed, reaching for weapons. "But," Jonas added, holding up his hands, "in exchange, I will personally testify that you were cooperative and that this whole thing was a misunderstanding initiated by your client." He glanced at Karis. "Your father will be angry, but he'll be more relieved. He'll probably ground you for a century, but it beats marriage to someone you hate."
And what about my escape?
Karis demanded. That ship has sailed, kid," Jonas said flatly. Over the comm, Saileen's voice was a furious hiss in Kira Mesa's ear.
What is he doing? What does he mean, complicated? I am not standing down on the word of a janitor.
Kira Mesa, remembering Jonas's story, made an instinctive decision to trust him.
"Prefect,"
she said into her own comm, her voice firm.
"The consultant has eyes on the situation. He advises we hold. His intel has been accurate thus far. I recommend we follow his lead."
It was the first time she had ever recommended a course of action contrary to her prefect's instincts. Inside, Jonas was working his strange magic. "Falk," he said, his tone reasonable. "You can fight your way out, maybe take down a few of them, and end up dead or in a labor camp for the rest of your life. Or you can walk out of here, face a minor charge of unauthorized transport, and be back in business in a month. Your choice." Falk looked at his crew, then at the petulant diplomat's daughter, then at the cooling boxes of food. He looked tired. "Fine," he grumbled. "Fine, but I'm keeping the 42 credits." Just as Jonas was about to seal the deal, the entire building shuddered. A deep, booming voice echoed from outside, amplified by a loudspeaker.
"This is Grin, Chief of Security for this sector. I understand there's been an unsanctioned kidnapping on my turf. That is bad for business."
The front door, which the smugglers had left unbarred, was kicked open. A massive alien with thick, scaled hide built like a runway hauler stood framed in the doorway, flanked by a dozen enforcers armed with heavy-duty plasma rifles. Grin's eyes scanned the room, landing on Saileen's warden, Broll, whose disguise seemed laughably thin.
Well,
Grin growled.
"Smugglers, a spoiled brat, and the Sidonian wardens. This has just become interesting."
One of Grin's enforcers fired the first shot. Broll, the Sidonian warden, moved faster than his bulk suggested, shoving Jonas and Karis behind a stack of heavy metal crates, just as a bolt plasma vaporized the spot where they had been standing. The room filled with the crackle of energy blast and shouting. Falk and his smugglers, caught between the wardens and Grin's crew, took over and added their own sporadic fire to the chaos.
Kira Mesa, Plan B!
Jonas yelled into his comm, his ears ringing.
Tell Celine the party started. They've pinned us down in the office.
Outside, the sound of the firefight was all the confirmation Saline required.
All teams, breach! Breach! Breach!
she commanded, her voice cold steel.
Subdue all hostiles! Secure the hostage!
The Sidonian wardens converged on the foreman's office from 3 directions. The junk heaps provided endless cover, turning the open ground into a series of deadly, narrow alleys. The wardens advanced in rigid lines, and single shooters firing from behind mountains of scrap picked them off. Jonas crouched behind the crates, watched the tactical situation devolve through a crack in the metal. Celine's team was taking fire, pinned down in a gully full of discarded ship plating. They were trying to lay down suppressing fire, but their shots impacted harmlessly against their thick junk.
Celine, can you hear me?
Jonas shouted into his comm.
Gable, report your status!
She yelled back, the sound of plasma fire crackling around her words.
My status is irrelevant. Your firing solution is garbage.
Jonas yelled.
Stop shooting at the cover. Shoot around it. Kira Mesa, you see that pile of magnetized plating above the gully to your left? Tell your snipers to target the supports. Use the environment.
Celine hesitated. Her training demanded she maintain disciplined fire, but her soldiers were being overwhelmed.
Do it,
she commanded. The warden snipers adjusted their aim. A few targeted shots hit the rusted supports. With a groaning screech, a literal avalanche of sharp, heavy metal plates crashed down, burying 2 of Grin's enforcers and forcing the rest to scatter from their entrenched position.
It worked!
Kira Mesa breathed over the comm.
Keep doing that,
Jonas yelled. Another squad of wardens was pinned down by a heavy repeater cannon.
Team Bravo, to your right. There's an exposed power conduit. Overload it. Create a diversion.
The wardens fought differently. They ricocheted shots off bulkheads to hit targets behind cover. They overloaded power systems to create blinding flashes and deafening noise. They used loose panels of scrap metal as improvised mobile shields, advancing under a clumsy but effective turtle shell of junk. It was ugly, it was undignified, it was working. Grin's forces collapsed under the warden's chaotic new tactics. Seeing his soldiers fall back, Grin let out a furious roar. He spotted Celine directing her soldiers from behind a wrecked engine block and charged. His massive frame shook the ground, a mountain of muscle descending upon her. Celine raised her rifle, but Grin was too close, too fast. She braced for impact. A Sidonian honor demanded she meet his charge head-on, a duel between commanders. And then she remembered Jonah's words. The problem is, your opponents rarely read the textbook. Grin's charge anticipated a perfect block, a blast of energy, an honorable stand. He found only open air as she feigned, dropped low, and stuck her leg out. The move was simple pragmatism, straight from a brawler's handbook. Grin, committed to his forward charge, was unprepared for it. His foot caught her armored leg, and his own momentum sent him crashing down with a thunderous impact that shook the entire scrapyard. Before he could recover, Celine's team was on him, securing him with the magnetic binders. The remaining enforcers, seeing their leader trussed up on the ground, threw down their weapons and surrendered. In the sudden silence, Celine stood over the defeated crime boss, breathing hard. She had won with a brawler's cheap trick, a victory of pragmatism over flawless technique. It was the most undignified victory of her entire career, and the most effective. She looked over toward the office, where Jonas was helping the diplomat's daughter out from behind the crates, dusting off her shoulders as if he were tidying up after a messy spill. He caught Celine's eye from across the scrapyard and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Celine felt a strange, unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. It might have been pride. Back on the pristine, solid concourses of Fulcrum, the universe felt sane again. They had filed the reports, masterpieces of bureaucratic creativity that highlighted the warden's success, while tactfully omitting any mention of noodle deliveries or leg sweeps. They returned the diplomat's daughter safely to her father, full of complaints about the quality of smuggler hideouts. The Marrow Dogs were in a holding cell, awaiting a lenient sentence for their cooperation. Grin and his crew were on a prison barge, heading for a much less pleasant future. The crisis was over. Jonas was mopping a corridor in a quiet, little-used section of the station. The familiar weight of the mop, the rhythmic swish of water, the slow, steady progress of a clean line appearing on a dirty floor. This was order. The soft, distinct footsteps of Sidonian armor approached, and he sighed. He kept looking at the floor. If you're here to offer me another adventure, the answer is no. I've met my quota for excitement this decade. Prefect Celine and Kira Mesa came to a stop beside him. They were in their formal polished armor, looking every bit the elite commanders they were. We have accepted your resignation from your temporary consultancy, Celine said, her tone formal. However, we have extended a new offer, a permanent, high-paying position as a tactical instructor for the Sidonian Walden Academy. Jonas stopped mopping. He leaned on the handle and looked up at her. The offer was real. He saw the sincerity in her expression. It was a chance to go back, to do what he was truly good at, to shape a new generation of soldiers, to make sure they would avoid the mistakes his old CO had made. He thought about the meetings, the reports, the simulations, the endless talking. He thought about the politics, the protocols, the pressure. Then he thought about the quiet hum of his floor buffer and the deep, simple satisfaction of a perfectly polished floor. I'm going to have to politely decline, Jonas said. He offered a small, apologetic smile. Too many meetings. Kira Mesa's posture relaxed in amusement. Celine, however, nodded, as if she had expected this answer. A brief expression, disappointment perhaps, or maybe just understanding, crossed her face before it vanished. As you wish, technician, she said. She and Kira Mesa turned to leave. As they walked away, Celine paused and pointed down with one of her hands. You missed a spot, she said. Jonas looked down. The toe of his own boot had left a tiny black scuff mark on the otherwise perfect floor. A slow smile touched Celine's features as she turned and walked away, Kira Mesa falling into step beside her. Celine and Kira Mesa exchanged a brief, amused glance. Jonas Gable watched them go. Then he sighed. He reached for the buffer he had parked against the wall. A scuff marred his floor. It needed setting right, and he was exactly the man for the job.